The harder we try not to think about things, and we have so many thoughts coming into our head every day, food is definitely going to come in. And if you're struggling with food and you're struggling with emotional and stress eating, you might think about food even more. So having abstinence, willpower, discipline is not always the best way to look at food because it's just an uphill battle and it's a challenge. And it's like your brain goes into overdrive and it makes you crave a lot of those off-limit foods. I'm your host, Kim Hines, and welcome to the Emotional Eats Podcast. I'm on a mission to show you that what you consume, not just the food, affects your entire life. Midlife is different. Let's dig into the real reasons why you eat when you're not hungry and why you're not feeling well. My guests and I are going to give you doable solutions and help you let go of perfectionism, food rules, and stress to make changes that will last a lifetime. If you're ready to ditch old school diet culture and nourish your entire life, this is the show for you. Welcome to episode 21 of the Emotional Eats Podcast. How do you feel about forbidden foods? Is there a food that you just can't have in the house because you are afraid that you will eat all of it? So abstinence, willpower, discipline, those are old school. So I want to teach you some ways to not only look at that food, think about that food, but also how to eat that food so that you can enjoy it and have balance without deprivation. Speaking of balance without deprivation, one of my favorite products that I have in the evening that not only doubles as my dessert, but also helps me calm down to sleep is Organifi Gold Chocolate. It is a wonderful turmeric tea that has turmeric, ginger, and reishi mushrooms and lemon balm extract to help calm down my brain and my body before I go to sleep. If you would like to look into any of the Organifi products, including my favorite, the Organifi Gold Chocolate, then go to Organifi.com and use the code KIMH for 20% off. Enjoy the show. Well, hello and welcome. Today, I am talking to you about having those forbidden foods in the house. Do you have foods that you keep in your cupboard or in your fridge or your freezer that you feel like need to be off limits? And if you struggle to have certain food in the house, knowing that you might eat it all, then this is the episode for you. So a lot of my clients will say, the ones that are dealing with emotional stress eating will say, I just can't have chocolate in the house. I just can't have chips in the house. I just can't have ice cream in the house. And I wanted to talk to you about that today because so many people feel the same way and are really struggling. And with this episode going live near the end of September, it's perfect because we are going to be heading into the holiday season. We have Halloween starting in October. We have Thanksgiving in November, Christmas in December. And then everyone vows to start over in January. And we have Valentine's Day in February. So what I want to help you with is not having to start over. What would happen if you actually could have them in the house? And some ideas to help you work around these food items, because maybe it's not just about the food. So I want to tell you a story. Many years ago, my kids, they know me so well. I love chocolate and peanut butter. And so what they did for my birthday is they gave me a gift bag, and it was filled with every version of Reese's peanut butter cups, pieces, crunchy bars, the big Reese's peanut butter cups, the little ones. There were so many different kinds in there. And at first I was so excited and I was so grateful for their thoughtfulness and I loved it. And then I became terrified because I knew if I had those in my house, the idea would be I would try to just have a little at a time, but could I hold back? And some of my clients report that sugar, especially, can be extremely addicting in their eyes. They use that word that it's just really hard to stop once they start. And it's just a slippery slope when they start in on the sugar. Some people feel that way with chips and salty foods also, depending on what your cravings are. And you'll have to go back and listen to Omar Cumberbatch. He does a great episode with me on how he felt about sugar and his choice to get sugar out of his life. And everyone is different. So we can go with the abstinence or we can go with working around having it in the house. So abstinence is a really interesting concept. I have used that throughout the years and it has not worked because to me, that is dieting. And when I say never and I can't have it, then guess what? I want it even more and I think about it even more. So when we have certain foods in the house, and I understand that some people also are using the words, my clients are using the words willpower and discipline, but they're old fashioned terms because they really make you rely on some things psychologically that are very difficult. I'll give you an example of this. If you were told right now, if I said, do not think about chocolate, what is the first thing you're going to think about? It may not be something you desire, but we could use another example. Do not think about a pink elephant. And what's the first thing that comes to your mind? So the harder we try not to think about things, and we have so many thoughts coming into our head every day, food is definitely going to come in. And if you're struggling with food and you're struggling with emotional and stress eating, you might think about food even more. So having abstinence, willpower, discipline is not always the best way to look at food because it's just an uphill battle and it's a challenge. And it's like your brain goes into overdrive and it makes you crave a lot of those off limit foods. So let's talk about this because with the holidays coming up, maybe you're that house that has, big bag of candy that you have out front and you're giving it out to the kids. And it's funny, I feel very blessed that I live kind of in the woods, so kids would not come back to our house. And when we would have the Halloween, the only thing I had to deal with the kids, they would be bringing home candy from doing their own trick or treating. Now they're a lot older, so I don't even have to deal with that, either giving it out or my kids coming home and having bags of candy. But this is how much I was drawn to sugar and, of course, the chocolate and the peanut butter cups. My kids would go to bed when they were very young, and I would sneak in. Have you ever been a secret eater? I would sneak in and I would take out some of those pieces that I liked. And luckily for both of us, they were more into the Sour Patch Kids and things like that instead of the chocolate and the sugar. And they definitely were not Snickers fans if they could have all the other things. So even for me, it's been a real pull, and if I know it's in the house, I could think about it all day long. So we want to change our thinking on this, and I wanted to give you some ideas because finding balance without deprivation is a really happy place to be. I want to step back for a moment and talk about abstinence again. For those of you who have worked with me, who've been with me on the podcast for a while, you know how much I love intuitive eating. For you new listeners, I'm really attached to the intuitive eating principles because it gives us life without so much deprivation, but we can still find healthy balance because in intuitive eating, we still may crave nutrient dense food when we really find life balance. Because intuitive eating does not just take into account food, it takes into account everything else that we have going on in our lives, like the stress and sleep and self care and how we talk to ourselves, not just food and mindful eating. So if you go back to episode 1, there's a really good explanation with my friend Andy, registered dietitian. Andy tells us a little bit more about diet culture versus intuitive eating. So let's talk about intuitive eating and what part of that I would love for you to look at when you are worried about having these foods around your house. So the first thing I want you to do is I do want you to imagine those foods. What is in your house that you've been trying to stay away from? What is in your house during the holidays? So I talked about Halloween, but Christmas is a big time. We have a lot of food around, a lot of Christmas cookies. We have anytime during the holidays, there's going to be extra food around the house. And for Thanksgiving, for us, it's usually pie. And for Christmas, it's usually Christmas cookies. So think about any time, but it could be even just now. I have so much control now over what I bring into the house, but I do have a 19-year-old. Out of the 4 kids, I still have one 19-year-old left. So there's other things in the house that I may not bring in. So it's not necessarily you bringing it in the house. It could be in the house. Maybe you have a partner, a spouse, or a roommate that's bringing food in also. So finding balance without deprivation is key. So my first thought for you is to think about giving yourself permission to eat. And this is so backward from what we're used to hearing, but giving yourself permission to eat instead of telling yourself you can't have it. Because again, when we talk to ourselves like that, and we're very negative when we say you can't have it, you shouldn't have it, and you absolutely are going to hate yourself if you have this food, that is a very negative feeling. And we don't move forward very well with feelings of hate, but feelings of love we do. So when we love ourselves into it and we say, I have permission to eat this anytime I want. When you open that door and you let go and you surrender and you actually say, maybe even speak to the food itself, I have permission to eat you anytime. I can eat you right now. I can eat you in 5 minutes. I can save you till tomorrow. But there's no urgency when you give yourself permission to eat. It's there. The food is there, and it's your feeling in control and the power, as opposed to the food having power over you when you give yourself permission to eat at any time. And that's just the first step. That is just the first step that I take with clients is just talk to yourself differently about this food. Talk to yourself as if you have permission to do anything you want. Because where does the non-permission come from? Diet culture, abstaining, being told we can't have things. So speak to yourself kindly and speak to the food and say, I can eat you anytime. That's the first step. The second step is if you really do want that food, how we eat food is very important. So take that food out, treat it like a meal, put it on a plate. If you want some chips or some chocolate, if you struggle to make it an event, then put it on a plate and sit down. So here's what happens when we are stressed and distracted and emotional, we eat food and we don't taste it. It goes down so quickly, and it's there to fill a different need: sadness, stress, loneliness, grief, irritation, conflict, whatever the need is that we're having to escape from. When we eat the food that we think is forbidden so quickly and we don't really enjoy it, we're not really filling the pleasure self-care need. So if we sit down with that food, not eating it in the car on the way home from the grocery store, not eating it in front of the TV, not eating it when you're on your phone, and you sit down and you eat it bite by bite, it's so good. And my clients know I have a 3-bite rule. And no, that does not mean you only eat 3 bites, because if it's good, you're going to want more, and that is okay because you have permission. So the 3-bite rule is when you think about having something, when you're emotional and stressed, it just goes in. But that first bite you do taste. The first bite with our taste buds is powerful. It's wow. It tastes so good. That first bite of anything that you've been really wanting tastes really great. The second bite is pretty good. The third bite is good, but as we keep eating things, we become a little more mindless and we're living off that memory of that first bite. So if you really want something, make sure you really pay attention to those first few bites. And you may find that you don't need any more if you've satisfied that sweet tooth, if you've just satisfied that urge to have that particular food. So consider slowing down and eating until your fullness cues kick in, your satisfaction cues kick in. The other thing that's really important is if you find that those foods are calling you all the time, you may want to make sure that you are having nutrient dense food throughout the day. Sometimes when we are not nourished, not just emotionally or through stress, but when we're not nourished because of our food, we tend to reach for other things that give us energy and give us that uplifting feeling, give us the little dopamine hit. So making sure that throughout the day, I'm not saying don't have that food and go have a salad. That's not realistic, but making sure you at least throughout the day are having nutrient dense food to make sure your body is getting everything that it needs to nourish itself so that when you have this other food, you know that it may be something else. You really truly just want it because of pleasure. Another point with the nutrient dense food is thinking about blood sugar because we do want to pay attention to blood sugar. And if you are going to have something, for example, that's very sugary, very carby, because aren't those satisfying? Those are the things that make us feel good immediately and help us escape. But making sure that you have something balanced before that. And I mentioned in the top 10 ways that I helped myself feel better in my 50s is I started eating differently when I had my protein and my vegetables, my fiber. And then I had the carbohydrates or the sweets, my blood sugar was much more stable. So that's something to think about. Again, you have permission to eat at any time. You can have it anytime and you can tell yourself that. And when you give yourself that permission, you actually have a moment to think, well, I get to have that, but maybe I'll have something more nutrient dense first so that my body feels better as I'm having it and I still get to taste it. Plus, another thing that I feel very comfortable with is when I have the sweets or I have that carb at the end of my meal, I'm already kind of full, and so I'm really tasting and it tastes great. I'm not just mindlessly eating it because I do feel that way about sugar. I feel for me that when I have it and I haven't eaten something really solid before that, that it's very easy for me to just keep eating because my body needs something, but it's taking it out on whatever's in front of me because it tastes so good and I'm living off the memory of that first bite. So let's also talk about triggers. I want you to be able to have that food in your house if you want it there for those occasional times when you would like to satisfy yourself with that food. But the other side of this is knowing that, again, it's not about the food. Sometimes we're turning to it out of boredom, for example, or procrastination. I work at home a couple days a week, and I do find that sometimes when I'm not really focused or I'm not getting on this project that I want to be working on, I will find myself in the pantry, the fridge, the freezer. So think about what your triggers are. Maybe you are alone. And sometimes when we're alone, based on things that might have happened to us in the past, we eat. We become secret alone eaters based on things that might have happened in the past. Sometimes we are just stressed, and food is a quick escape and one of the easiest and fastest things for us to reach for when we are stressed out. And sometimes you just want it. And that's okay too. So identify your triggers, try to figure out what your cycle is, and if you're doing the same thing over and over again. So I have told this story before, but for new listeners, before I was a nutritionist, I was a high school math teacher. And I would do a lot of driving and then do a lot of things with the kids, had middle school and high school kids that I came home to also. And I would come home and I had a pattern. My habit cycle was to set my bag down, go straight to the pantry and eat blue corn chips because they were there. That was part of it. They were there, and it was something that broke up my day. So after doing all the busy things of driving around, teaching 100 teenagers, then coming home to the kids, it was my break in the day. And it signified I was home, but it became such a habit that I did it every single time. So look at your patterns also. Are you constantly going in to get those forbidden foods that we are calling forbidden, but they're really not forbidden foods? Are you going to them and you have a pattern? If you find that you have a pattern, that's great. That is step number one. Instead of being critical of yourself, be curious. What's my pattern? How do I break the pattern? What do I really need? And again, if you want the food, give yourself permission to eat, because if you don't, then you'll eat more of the food. Giving yourself that permission to eat slows down the process, and there isn't the novelty, there isn't the naughtiness to it. It's like, oh, I can do this. I'm allowed to do this. And then you are more likely to enjoy it, slow it down, and have less. Another thing I'd love for you to do. So let's say you indulge. Let's say you have too much. Let's say you start eating the chips and half the bag is gone. Or like me, I start eating the Reese's and I'm halfway through the bag of Reese's. If that happens, the number one thing to do is to, one, give yourself grace. Give yourself a break. It happens. Beating yourself up is not going to solve the problem. Step number two after eating, if you ate and you wished you didn't, step number two is, again, get curious instead of getting critical. When you get critical, your brain and your body shuts down. We all feel defensive even with ourselves. So get curious. What's going on with me? I ate that. Oh, well, it's done. What is going on with me? Why am I getting into this? And what did I really need? That is the biggest thing. What did you really need? If you'd like to learn more about intuitive eating, if you'd like to learn more about how I work with clients with intuitive eating, make sure you reach out. I'm on Instagram at Kim Hines Health, and just click the link in the bio and schedule a free 30-minute no obligation call. And I can talk to you about how I work with people in my program to help people learn these principles, really practice them, and let them become a part of their lives. I appreciate you being here today. I've given you some tips. If you listen to the show, make sure you tag me and let me know which ones you're using. And I appreciate you being here. Have a great day. I really appreciate you being here. If you resonated with this podcast, it would mean a lot to me if you'd be willing to follow or subscribe to the Emotional Eats podcast. Then you'll never miss an episode. Just go to the Emotional Eats show page on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts, and tap the plus sign in the upper right-hand corner and click on it. While you're there, if you'd be willing to give me a 5-star rating and review, I would be so grateful. If you'd like to take a screenshot and share it on Instagram, just tag me at Kim Hines Health. I would love to hear your thoughts and let me know how I can support you. You can always DM me on Instagram, again, at Kim Hines Health. And just remember to nourish your life and give yourself grace today.